Welcome to Snoozecast, the podcast designed to help you fall asleep. Find us on snoozecast.com and follow us on Instagram @snoozecast to find behind-the-scenes content. If you enjoy our show, please write a review on the Apple Podcasts app. Also, share us with a friend. Please know that we read and appreciate every single review. Here's a recent one we loved. The subject line is, "This podcast changed my nighttime routine." It goes, "Great material that I honestly wish I could stay awake for, but can't." Thank you, Katie, for taking the time to write a review. We're glad you enjoy the stories, and even gladder that you can't stay awake to hear them all. If you'd like to get an email once a week with upcoming sleep stories and other news, subscribe to the Snoozeletter at snoozecast.com. This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters and by the sun, the moon, and the stars. Tonight, we'll read the next part to The Princess and the Goblin, a children's fantasy novel published in 1872. If you'd like to start from the beginning, you'll find the first episode aired on April 15th, 2019. If you'd like an easy way to listen to these continuing episodes in order, go to snoozecast.com/series. One of the most successful and beloved of Victorian fairy tales, George Macdonald's The Princess and the Goblin tells the story of young Princess Irene and her friend Curdie, who must outwit the threatening goblins who live in the caves beneath her mountain home. When we left off, Princess Irene couldn't sleep as she had a painfully sore finger. She wanders upstairs to see if she can find her secret grandmother again. The grandmother cures her injury and lets her sleep with her that night. Also, we learn more about Curdie's love and admiration for his strong and wise mother, Mrs. Peterson. We also learn that he has been saving up to buy her a new petticoat. Let's get cozy. Close your eyes. Relax your body into the softness of your bed. Now, take a few deep breaths. Chapter 13. The Cobb's Creatures. About this time, the gentleman whom the king had left behind him to watch over the princess had each occasion to doubt the testimony of his own eyes, for more than strange were the objects to which they would bear witness. They were of one sort, creatures, but so misshapen as to be more like a child's drawings upon his slate than anything natural. They saw them only at night, while on guard about the house. The testimony of the man who first reported having seen one was that, as he was walking slowly round the house, while yet in the shadow, he caught sight of a creature standing on its hind legs in the moonlight, with its 4 feet upon a window ledge, staring in at the window. Its body might have been that of a dog or a wolf, he thought, but he declared on his honor that its head was twice the size it ought to have been for the size of its body, and as round as a ball, while the face, which it turned upon him as it fled, was more like one carved by a boy upon a turnip, inside which he is going to put a candle, than anything else he could think of. It rushed into the garden. He sent an arrow after it and thought he must have struck it, for it gave a howl, and he could not find his arrow any more, although he searched all about the place where it vanished. They laughed at him until he was driven to hold his tongue and said he must have taken too long a pull at the ale jug. But before 2 nights were over, he had one to side with him, for he, too, had seen something strange, only quite different from that reported by the other. The description of the second man gave of the creature he had seen was yet more unlikely. They were both laughed at by the rest, but night after night another came over to their side, until at last there were only one left to laugh at all his companions. 2 nights more passed, and he saw nothing. But on the 3rd, he came rushing from the garden to the other 2 before the house, in such an agitation that they declared, for it was their turn now, that the band of his helmet was cracking under his chin with the rising of his hair inside it. Running with him into that part of the garden which I have already described, they saw a score of creatures, to not one of which they could give a name, and not one of which was like the other, all ludicrous, gambolling in the lawn in the moonlight. The supernaturalness of their faces, the length of legs and necks in some, the apparent absence of both or either in others, made the spectators, although in one consent as to what they saw, yet doubtful, as I have said, of the evidence of their own eyes, and ears as well, for the noises they made, although not loud, were uncouth and varied as their forms, and could be described neither as grunts, nor squeaks, nor roars, nor howls, nor barks, nor yells, nor screams, nor croaks, nor hisses, nor meows, nor shrieks, but only as something like all of them mingled together. Keeping in the shade, the watchers had a few moments to recover themselves before the assembly suspected their presence. But all at once, as if by common consent, they scampered off in the direction of a great rock and vanished before the men had come to themselves sufficiently to think of following them. My readers will suspect what these were, but I will now give them full information concerning them. They were, of course, household animals belonging to the goblins, whose ancestors had taken their ancestors many centuries before from the upper regions of light into the lower regions of darkness. The original stocks of these creatures were very much the same as the animals now seen about farms and homes in the country, with the exception of a few of them, which had been wild creatures, such as foxes, and indeed wolves and small bears, which the goblins, from their proclivity toward the animal creation, had caught when cubs and tamed. But in the course of time, all had undergone even greater changes than had passed upon their owners. They had altered, that is, their descendants had altered, into these creatures, as I have not attempted to describe except in the vaguest manner, the various parts of their bodies assuming, in an apparently arbitrary and self-willed manner, the most strange developments. Indeed, so little did any distinct type predominate in some of the bewildering results, that you could only have guessed at any known animal as the original, and even then, what likeness remained would be more one of general expression than of definable conformation. No one understands animals who does not see that every one of them, even amongst the fishes, it may be with a dimness and vagueness infinitely remote, yet shadows the human. In the case of these, the human resemblance had greatly increased, while their owners had sunk towards them. They had risen towards their owners. But the conditions of subterranean life being equally unnatural for both, while the goblins were worse, the creatures had not improved by the approximation, and its result would have appeared far more ludicrous than consoling to the warmest lover of animal nature. I shall now explain how it was that just then these animals began to show themselves about the king's country house. The goblins, as Curdie had discovered, were mining on, at work both day and night, in divisions, urging the scheme after which he lay in wait. In the course of their tunneling, they had broken into the channel of a small stream, but the break being in the top of it, no water had escaped to interfere with their work. Some of the creatures, hovering as they often did about their masters, had found the hole, and had, with the curiosity which had grown in passion from the restraints of their unnatural circumstances, proceeded to explore the channel. The stream was the same which ran out by the seat on which Irene and her king papa had sat, as I have told, and the goblin creatures found it jolly fun to get out for a romp on a smooth lawn such as they had never seen in all their poor, miserable lives. But although they had partaken enough of the nature of their owners to delight in annoying and alarming any of the people whom they met on the mountain, they were, of course, incapable of designs of their own, or of intentionally furthering those of their masters. For several nights after, the men-at-arms were at length of one mind as to the fact of the visits of some creatures, Whether bodily or spectral, they could not yet say. They watched with special attention that part of the garden where they had last seen them. Perhaps indeed they gave in consequence too little attention to the house. But the creatures were too cunning to be easily caught, nor were the watchers quick-eyed enough to descry the head or the keen eyes in it, which, from the opening whence the stream issued, would watch them in turn, ready, the moment they should leave the lawn, to report the place clear. Chapter 14. That night week. During the whole of the week, Irene had been thinking every other moment of her promise to the old lady, although even now she could not feel quite sure that she had not been dreaming. Could it really be that an old lady lived up in the top of the house, with pigeons and a spinning wheel and a lamp that never went out? She was, however, none the less determined on the coming Friday to ascend the 3 stairs, walk through the passages with the many doors, and try to find the tower in which she had either seen or dreamed her grandmother. Her nurse could not help wondering what had come to the child. She would sit so thoughtfully silent, and even in the midst of a game would so suddenly fall into a dreamy mood. But Irene took care to betray nothing, whatever efforts Ludi might make to get at her thoughts. And Ludi had to say to herself, "What an odd child she is," and give it up. At length, the longed-for Friday arrived, and lest Ludi should be moved to watch her, Irene endeavored to keep herself as quiet as possible. In the afternoon, she asked for her doll's house and went on arranging and rearranging the various rooms and their inhabitants for a whole hour. Then she gave a sigh and threw herself back in her chair. One of the dolls would not sit, and another would not stand, and they were all very tiresome. Indeed, there was one that would not even lie down, which was too bad. But it was now getting dark, and the darker it got, the more excited Irene became, and the more she felt it necessary to be composed. "I see you want your tea, Princess," said the nurse. "I will go and get it. The room feels close. I will open the window a little. The evening is mild. It won't hurt you." "There's no fear of that, Ludi," said Irene, wishing she had put off going for the tea till it was darker, when she might have made her attempt with every advantage. I fancy Ludi was longer in returning than she had intended, for when Irene, who had been lost in thought, looked up, she saw it was nearly dark, and at the same moment caught sight of a pair of eyes, bright with a green light, glowering at her through the open window. The next instant, something leaped into the room. It was like a cat, with legs as long as a horse's, Irene said, but its body no bigger, and its legs no thicker than those of a cat. She jumped from her chair and ran from the room. It is plain enough to every one of my readers what she ought to have done. And indeed, Irene thought of it herself. But when she came to the foot of the old stair, just outside the nursery door, she imagined the creature running up those long ascents after her, and running through the dark passages, which after all might lead to no tower. That thought was too much. She turned from the stair, rushed along the hall, whence, finding the front door open, she darted into the court, pursued, at least she thought so, by the creature. No one happening to see her, on she ran, and ready to run anywhere to elude the creature with the stilt legs. Not daring to look behind her, she rushed straight out of the gate and up the mountain. The princess was soon out of breath with running uphill, but she ran on, forgetting that, had it been after her, such long legs as those must have overtaken her long ago. At last, she could run no longer, and fell by the roadside, where she lay for some time. But, finding nothing lay hold of her, and her breath beginning to come back, she ventured at length to get half up and peer about her. It was now so dark she could see nothing. Not a single star was out. She could not even tell in what direction the house lay. She saw now that she ought to have run up the stairs at once. Although very few of the goblins had come out for weeks, a stray idler or two might have heard her. She sat down upon a stone. She had quite forgotten her promise to visit her grandmother. A raindrop fell on her face. She looked up, and for a moment she was lost in astonishment. At first, she thought the moon was rising, drawn nigh to see what could be the matter with the little girl, sitting alone, without hat or cloak, on the dark, bare mountain. But she soon saw she was mistaken, for there was no light on the ground at her feet, and no shadow anywhere, but a great silver globe was hanging in the air. And as she gazed at the lovely thing, her courage revived. If she were but indoors again, she would fear nothing, not even the terrible creature with the long legs. But how was she to find her way back? What could that light be? Could it be? No, it couldn't. But what if it should be? Yes, it must be her great-great-grandmother's lamp, which guided her pigeons home through the darkest night. She jumped up. She had but to keep that light in view, and she must find the house. Her heart grew strong. Speedily, yet softly, she walked down the hill, hoping to pass the watching creature unseen. Dark as it was, there was little danger now of choosing the wrong road. And, which was most strange, the light that filled her eyes from the lamp, instead of blinding them for a moment to the object upon which they next fell, enabled her for a moment to see it, despite the darkness. By looking at the lamp and then dropping her eyes, she could see the road for a yard or two in front of her, and this saved her from several falls, for the road was very rough. But all at once, to her dismay, the light vanished. The same instant, however, she caught the light of the windows and knew exactly where she was. It was too dark to run, but she made what haste she could and reached the gate in safety. She found the house door still open, ran through the hall, and, without even looking into the nursery, bounded straight up the stair, and the next, and the next, and the next. Then, turning to the right, ran through the long avenue of silent rooms and found her way at once to the door at the foot of the tower stair.